On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, it is about belief. We should be used to believing in Memphis, and yet you watch Vince Williams Jr., you watch G.G. Jackson, the 2 seasons that made a lost season a gap year. Is it enough to believe in these guys going into a season where the Memphis Grizzlies should be title contenders? I'll talk about that and so much more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, flying solo, no DeMichael Cole on this episode of the show. He's off breaking news. He's off doing things for being a beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies, for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning beat writer, I will point out once again. DeMichael will be flying solo on our Wednesday edition of the podcast. He'll talk to you all about what he has been breaking news on and covering for the Commercial Appeal. But it is I, Joe Mullinax, his co-host, joining you solo on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Again, here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Hopefully at this point, you're hanging out with myself and or DeMichael Cole each and every time an episode drops because you're an everydayer. You get excited. You wake up in the morning, you get on the treadmill, you go work out, you get to work before other people do, you're on lunch, whatever the case might be. However you take on Locked On Grizzlies and take in the show, we appreciate you being with us each and every time we have an episode. And today is no different, right? Even with DeMichael not able to join me, I want to continue our conversation, our series, if you will, of player reviews. And again, once we got beyond the big three, we're mixing it up a little bit, right? With the structure of the Monday show, we talked about Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard, their value to the team. Going into next season, should the Grizzlies keep them both? Money's going to be tight, all those kinds of conversations. If you missed that episode yesterday, I thought it was a pretty good conversation. Today, we're going to talk about belief. And again, you know, I'm older than DeMichael. I've been covering the Grizzlies longer than DeMichael. He's doing so as a beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. I am a former blogger. I do a lot of work around the Grizzlies and have done a lot of work around the Grizzlies since 2013. Excuse me. And Believe Memphis used to be a very popular tagline during the grit and grind era. They put it on growl towels, that sort of stuff over a decade ago. And the concept of belief, if you are a long-term fan in the Memphis Grizzlies, should not be foreign to you. And depending on your faith, depending on how you view the world, belief in general. And I promise this is Locked On Grizzlies, not Locked On Philosophy. The point I'm trying to make is belief is very much a part of the human experience, right? For some reason, and I'm most certainly including myself in this, I want to stress that. For some reason, we struggle with belief in 2 guys that made this Grizzly season not a lost season, but a gap year. And I'll start off with the younger one in G.G. Jackson, because watching him play this past season was a revelation for multiple reasons. One of the main ones being it wasn't supposed to occur. If the Memphis Grizzlies do not have the health issues, if the Memphis Grizzlies do not have the roster turnover because of folks in and out the injured reserve, if that stuff doesn't happen, G.G. Jackson almost certainly never gets the chance to show what he did for the Memphis Grizzlies this past season. And probably an all-rookie campaign. Probably going to make second team all-rookie. I'm not quite sure how he wouldn't at this point. In an all-rookie campaign, in fewer games than a lot of rookies get, because of the fact that he was on a 2-way contract to start the season. He was not a full-time roster member. His contract gets converted in large part because when he was given the opportunities on that 2-way deal, he shined, especially offensively. But as the season went on, he grew as a 2-way player, not in terms of contract, but in terms of defensive intensity. Towards the end of the season with Vince Williams Jr., who we're going to talk more about later, with Vince Williams Jr. out, it was G.G. Jackson that drove that was given a lot of the defensive assignments that were most challenging. It was G.G. Jackson at the ripe old age of 19 who was put in position numerous times to be a leading scorer for this Grizzlies team. And he was able to do that. He was a bucket getter to the nth degree. 40 points here, 40 points there, doing things that no 19-year-old since LeBron James have been able to do. And he has that capacity to be a shooter, which surprised me, and I'm guessing it surprised you too. Even the most vocal and adamant G.G. Jackson supporters didn't think he had that three-point shooting capability. Is it likely that he maintains that year to year? We'll talk more about that later on in the show. He has never really been a three-point threat, but he was this year. And that's in part due to his coachability, the way that he's adjusted his shot, and how he has been developed under the Taylor Jenkins coaching staff. It's not just Jenkins, of course. There's other assistants that work with Gigi. Gigi has given those coaches credit here, there, and everywhere. It's an overall staff thing with Memphis in terms of the strength of their coaches developing these players. G.G. Jackson not shying away from the moment, right? In a way that was similar to what Dillon Brooks had to do back in the 2018 season, when in that lost year, Dillon was asked to be that defensive force. He was asked to be that offensive engine. He was put in a position to be asked to do more than he should have been asked to do. And it was part of losing basketball, right? Fast forward 6 years, that's exactly what happens with Gigi. Now, Dillon Brooks was much more experienced coming out of college. That's important to point out. G.G. Jackson, I think it's fair to say, has a more natural skill set, whether it's just the whatever gods may be given ability to be 6'9" and have the lateral quickness and the athleticism that Dillon Brooks almost certainly would kill for. G.G. Jackson has a lot of those attributes that, in fairness, Memphis has been looking for a long time in a combo forward, going all the way back to the Rudy Gay days. Again, I feel like I'm a grit and grind historian here. But the reality is Memphis has been looking for a wing that can be that type of player, that has the capacity to play both the 3 and the 4. Because even when Zaire Williams was drafted, that wasn't him, right? Zaire was always more of a perimeter-based guy. He's more of a 2 and a 3 than he is a 3 and a 4. With Gigi, when you look at that frame, DeMichael and I have talked about this before, he has the look of a stretch 4 long-term. That's how he seems to me. And in fairness to Gigi, he showed as the season went on that he's capable of defending on the perimeter, and maybe we should give him credit in this starting 3 conversation. Now, as DeMichael alluded to on yesterday's show, and I agree with him, if Marcus Smart remains a part of this team's long-term plan, Smart should still be the starter. But there's no denying that G.G. Jackson has proven his capacity to score, his unwillingness to be shaken by the moment, and his coachability and understanding of taking opportunity and making the most of it. Because that's G.G. Jackson's season in a nutshell. And again, it wasn't in a way that he saved the Memphis season. It was beyond saving. But what G.G. Jackson was able to do was display all the talent that he had back a couple years ago when he was the number 1 recruit in the ESPN 150 in his recruiting class. And then he makes the decision to reclassify and go to South Carolina, become the youngest player in the NBA, basically, coming off of that 2-way contract. And all along the way, any question about maturity that there may have been outside of a suspension, right? Gigi was suspended this past season for behavior, but it was a minor thing, and you didn't hear much about that after that. And that's important to understand. May he who is without sin cast the first stone, right? Who among us is perfect enough to say, oh, Gigi shouldn't have done that? How immature is he? What were you doing, dear listener, dear viewer, when you were 19 years old? I'll tell you what I was doing, a whole lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing. And you know who cared? A heck of a lot less people than care about G.G. Jackson. He's growing up literally and figuratively in front of our eyes. And for him to have the kind of season he did in that spot is worthy of being commended. And it's great that he is now likely a key cog of this organization moving forward. Memphis has him under contract for the next few years. Good news for not just G.G. Jackson fans, but for the Memphis Grizzlies as well. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will cover the other pleasant surprise of the season. It wasn't just G.G. Jackson opening eyes. The shock and awe of Vince Williams Jr. We'll cover that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we need to get things off our chest, right? Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that stuff out, especially to somebody who may be unbiased on your life. So today, dear listener, dear viewer, I'm going to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. I am really struggling with the idea that the Memphis Grizzlies would not be served to have Donovan Clingan on their team. It wouldn't be a positive development. I'm not sure how you can watch Clingan on tape, see what he did in college, and think he would negatively impact a team that desperately needs a big that has his skill set. I struggle with that. Hopefully you do as well. Obviously, that's not something that should be weighing on your mind too heavily, but therapy can be different for everybody. A lot of people, myself included, have bigger problems than draft picks and NBA rosters. It's important to get things off your chest regardless of the scope or scale of the perceived issue. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking the surprising brilliance of Vince Williams Jr. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. No to Michael Cole. I miss him terribly. I'm sure you do as well. But he's busy doing beat writer things that I'm sure he'll talk about on his Wednesday edition of the podcast. Again, I will not be with him on Tuesday or on the Wednesday show. This is the Tuesday edition, and I, Joe Mullinax, am flying solo. Happy to be talking the two pleasant surprises of this past season for the Memphis Grizzlies. We covered G.G. Jackson and his offensive explosion, his defensive development, taking on tougher assignments as the season went on. The guy who got those tough assignments pretty consistently from the beginning was Vince Williams Jr., and he is our other pleasant surprise. The other guy that it makes it tough to call this a lost season for Memphis because you found another key cog in Vince Williams Jr. And as much as we talk about G.G. Jackson potentially being this year's draft pick, if Memphis chooses to trade whatever lottery selection they're about to receive on the lottery selection night this coming Sunday, Vince Williams Jr. is that for the draft class that included Jake LaRavia, who had a strong end of his season, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about Jake down the road here on Locked On Grizzlies. But him, David Roddy, Kennedy Chandler, all these guys that either aren't on the roster anymore or have underachieved, it is Vince Williams Jr. who has made those picks look a heck of a lot better. And that's a testament, first and foremost, to Vince Williams Jr. Because as I've said on Locked On Grizzlies on numerous occasions, I live in the Richmond, Virginia area. And Vince Williams Jr., of course, is a VCU Ram, former Ram. And I would talk to people who either had season tickets or were fans of VCU, and they obviously follow the Rams that are in the NBA. I know a lot more about Bones Highland than I probably need to. But Vince Williams Jr., they followed as well. And they came up and they said, it's amazing what he's doing because he didn't show some of the things that he's doing for the Grizzlies while he was in college at a mid-major at VCU. Like Vince Williams Jr. being part of the equation for why the Memphis Grizzlies probably do not need another backup point guard. That's a wild thing to say out loud. But we saw enough of Vince Williams Jr. facilitating offense, creating for others off the dribble, off the pick and roll. He is better with the ball in his hands than I think anybody expected, including VCU. To Vince Williams Jr.'s credit, he has felt all along that this was in his game, and all he needed was an opportunity to display it. And he's taken advantage of every chance he's gotten. But we can't overlook how shocking the rise of Vince Williams Jr. could be or should be in our minds. Because even the most stickler draft guy, big nerd, I actually foresaw this because of the numbers. Vince Williams Jr. had pretty impressive advanced statistics, and that data was driven, I'm sure, within the Grizzlies front office for the reason to choose him. But those picks don't always work just because they're based off the numbers. Numbers loved David Roddy. And David Roddy is probably a fringe NBA player at this point. The numbers love Jake LaRavia, and the last 15 to 20 games of this season excluded, the larger sample size suggests that Jake LaRavia is a bust. Could that change? Yeah, absolutely. But to this point, for Memphis, Vince Williams Jr. has been the most successful piece, and he was the second-round pick. He was the guy that we looked at as a 3-and-D player. Maybe it's not as surprising that Vince Williams Jr. is a contributor. Maybe you saw a rotation possibility for him. But for him to be in like a legitimate conversation, to me, I would still start Marcus Smart. But I think that Vince Williams Jr. second, I would go Vince Williams Jr. before G.G. Jackson, and I'll talk about why later on in the show if we're going to replace Smart as a starter, or if you trade Marcus Smart like we talked a little bit about on yesterday's program. I think that the fact we're even having this conversation is a testament to what Vince Williams Jr. should be. Because at this stage, everybody can agree that G.G. Jackson shouldn't have fallen as far as he did. His talent was never the question. There were maturity issues, whether they were overblown or not. That's a topic for another podcast, perhaps. Vince Williams Jr. was never seen as that level of talent. If he was, he wouldn't have been at VCU. So for him to come out of college, add to his bag so substantially, be a player that on both ends of the floor can impact winning. You saw that time and again, and that's a little bit different than Gigi. Gigi at times got his 40 points off, and they were in losing efforts. Vince Williams Jr. a lot of times contributed to winning basketball. And that makes him attractive to a team that is going to be trying to win every game they can once healthy next season. So the existence of Vince Williams Jr. makes Marcus Smart trades more realistic, whether it's Brooke Lopez, Wendell Carter Jr. You try to throw him into another trade to bring in another big, a starting caliber big. Vince Williams Jr. enables you to realistically shop Smart if that's the path you want to take. Now, like DeMichael and I talked about on the Monday show, not necessarily the path we want Memphis to take. We both believe in Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, and as I said on yesterday's show, I would run it back, aside from bringing in somebody like a Donovan Clingan or another big in the draft if they trade up, back, whatever the case might be, or if they move up in the lottery. Obviously, our Monday show next week, we'll talk all about how the lottery shakes out. That lottery is on Sunday. But Vince Williams Jr.'s existence, G.G. Jackson Jr.'s existence, allows for these conversations to be more flexible because you have good basketball players that could theoretically fill the void. And that, at this stage of Memphis's window as a contender, is more true about Vince Williams Jr. because of what he brings to the table as a creator of offense for others in particular. That is not a strength of G.G. Jackson's game. And we'll talk more about that later on in the show. One of the reasons that it's hard to subscribe to the Believe Memphis mantra with both of these guys. One of the reasons that I'm not going to bang the desk and say, trade Marcus Smart, trade Luke Kennard. You don't need them anymore. Bring in a starting caliber big and let's roll with Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson into the postseason. I am not that confident. And I don't necessarily think you should be either, dear listener, dear viewer, and I'll explain why here in a moment. But that doesn't take away from what Vince Williams Jr. was for Memphis and what he can be. I see Vince Williams Jr. fitting alongside John Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. better than G.G. Jackson, at least to start. I see Vince Williams Jr. filling a role within that starting lineup that provides defense, that provides some spacing, and even more importantly, the growth in his game as a facilitator for himself and others off the dribble. That is the kind of thing that is going to help that offense expand and develop and mature. That is the type of thing that's going to enable Memphis to get back to their winning ways as a defensive team. All that combined adds up to a really impressive season for Vince Williams Jr. and a really significant one because he is in place and he can give Memphis even greater flexibility than maybe they've realized they had. So Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson, again, not a lost season, a gap year in large part because of those two dudes. But are you trying to win a championship or not? That's going to be the driving focus and force behind my lack of belief, at least at this moment, in Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson doing what they need to do for the Memphis Grizzlies to be a title contender. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, you'll notice, aside from my excitable nature, I'm not screaming at you. dear listener, dear viewer. I might be a floating talking head, but we're having a conversation. I'm preventing my emotions from getting the best of me, and I am presenting information in a somewhat analytical, mostly opinionated way. You can do this, ESPN and Fox Sports. It doesn't have to be so loud all the time, and that is exactly how it is at Locked On Sports Today, your first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Analysis, news, all sorts of wonderful takes from all the great hosts all across the Locked On Podcast Network, including yours truly, and to Michael Cole from time to time. In addition to all of the league weekly or daily shows, Locked On NBA, for example, you can catch all of that over on Locked On Sports Today, both on YouTube and that streaming 24/7 channel, as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. Oh, my goodness. Mother's Day is on the way. And whether it's my mom or whether it's my wife, a mother of my 3 children, I can't wait to spoil both of them with flowers, surprising them with gifts from the brands they love. Hopefully they don't listen to the show. Delivered the very same day with DoorDash. Again, shop with savings that would make any mom proud. With a Dash Pass membership, you will save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including a service fee, may apply. Terms may apply. And again, this is for flowers. This is for books. This is for coffee. This is for any kind of item that you can get through DoorDash. You can't go wrong. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show with my lack of belief or hesitancy. Maybe I'm, agnostic about these 2 players helping the Grizzlies in the playoffs. Maybe I shouldn't be. We'll talk it out next. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo on this Tuesday edition of the show. Sorry, it's been a crazy week already, getting my days mixed up. Happy to be with you on this Tuesday. On the Wednesday edition of the show, my co-host, Michael Cole, will fly solo. He'll talk to you about all the news that he's been breaking over the commercial appeal. Lots of good stuff to read over there at the Michael C. Make sure you're checking him out on X. If you want to get mad on X every once in a while, you can follow me at Joe Mullinax. And this might be one of those days that people get mad at me. Excuse me. And maybe they shouldn't, right? Because this is very much, at least it feels this way to me, right? It feels this way to me. It feels like one of those times where, why are you booing me? I'm right? Because Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson had phenomenal seasons, especially compared to what they were to begin the campaign. They went from 2-way contract players to parts of the core moving forward. That is a staggering leap, a staggering jump in significance to the organization. And maybe you want to try to make an argument that Gigi Jackson always had that importance. My counter to you, dear friend, would be, oh, okay, then why was he the 45th pick? Why? Tell me, dear listener, dear viewer, riddle me this. Why was he on a 2-way contract to start the year? Why? Why was Vince Williams Jr. there? Are we to assume that the Grizzlies front office and their coaching staff and a large chunk of the NBA that took both of those dudes for granted, apparently, and let them fall to the second round? Are we to assume that they're all dumb and wrong? No. But that's the beauty of sport. Sometimes people rise above whatever the issues might be, whatever the concerns. Maybe you miss on a prospect, but missing on 2 guys? That seems unlikely. It seems like these dudes are taking advantage of opportunity and they're doing more with it than was expected of them. But that is different in a losing season. It's not a lost year. It is a gap year because of the development of these guys being possible rotation pieces on a championship contender. And I'll go as far as to take the possible out. I think they both will be rotation members on a championship contender in the Memphis Grizzlies. But before we get all hot and bothered about what that looks like, we have to keep in mind that they've never done it for a team that's trying to win in the NBA. Oh, but gee, Joe, they're always trying to win. That's my Mickey Mouse voice. Yeah, the players and coaches are always trying to win, but very clearly the organization made a decision at some point, and there's lots of places you could point at if you want to hypothesize. But at some point, this season was no longer about winning and losing. This season was about development and letting the chips fall where they may in terms of winning. I would argue that was as soon as Joe Morant hurt his shoulder. You might think different, and that's fine. Let me know in the comments. But as soon as Joe Morant hurt his shoulder and he was out for the remainder of the campaign, punt. Look ahead to next fall. And that enables development, and that allows for chances for guys like G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. to show their worth. But what happens when Memphis is trying to win? Is it logical to depend on a 20-year-old, which is what G.G. Jackson will turn in terms of age during the upcoming campaign? Is it logical to depend on a player that young at all in a championship rotation, much less as a starter, like some people are arguing? Joe Morant, Desmond Bane, G.G. Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr., Donovan Clingan. Is that a starting five that competes for an NBA championship? You can make an argument because of Clingan, it's not. I would make a stronger argument because of G.G. Jackson, it's not. Doesn't mean that G.G. won't be good. Doesn't mean that he can't be that. But you're prepared right now, dear listener, dear viewer, to tell me to my face that this guy has the goods? You don't have evidence to suggest that, at least on the scale that I'm referencing. Same thing with Vince Williams Jr. Now, the reason I believe in Vince Williams Jr. in that role more than I believe in G.G. Jackson is because of his capacity to create. Not just off the dribble, but for others. His assist numbers are better. He ran some point guard. When you saw G.G. Jackson do it, it wasn't as significant in terms of giving other players opportunity to score. Vince Williams Jr. did better with that. Vince Williams Jr. has a game that is not as usage dependent, which is why if G.G. Jackson is going to be a part of this championship rotation next year, in my opinion, and needs to be a part of a reserve unit, it needs to be next to one of Ja or Dez or Jaren, not both, and certainly not all three. Because where he shined the most was in those high usage scoring situations. Memphis has needed a tall, athletic wing for a long time. You're right. I tip my cap. But we have to be real about what to expect from this young man. Expecting him to be a 20 to 25-minute bucket getter off the bench every night? I think that's realistic on a championship team. Vince Williams Jr., 20-minute or so a night, defensive, offensive, two-way player, an elite role player, or a player that does his role in an elite manner, like DeMichael has talked about before, I can sign off on that. So this is not an indictment against those guys as rotational pieces. Where my belief struggles, and you can let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree, where I have problems with belief is that either of these guys can be starters or beyond 25-minute a game contributors, major rotation pieces on a championship contending team. I know Marcus Smart can do it. I've seen it. I know Luke Kennard can do it. Maybe he's not out there 30 minutes a game, but I know that he in those big spots provides spacing because of his elite three-point shooting. We have not seen that from G.G. Jackson on a consistent basis. We haven't seen it in an extended stretch from Vince Williams Jr. Seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. Have they had that opportunity yet? No. Do they have to have that chance to actually add that to their resume? Sure. I think that's fair. But are you willing to bet another year of this championship window on those two guys being able to do, especially what Marcus Smart, but to a lesser extent, what Luke Kennard can do? And moving on from those players, like we hypothesized yesterday and determined we shouldn't, I most certainly wouldn't trade Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson at this point. Everybody's got a price, but it would take a lot more than Marcus Smart even. But that doesn't necessarily translate to those guys being in front of Smart, especially Smart, but even Kennard in some situations, on a team that is trying to contend for a championship. So I believe in the long-term vision. But as you're going to hear me say throughout the offseason, are you trying to win a championship or not? Don't become over-reliant, even in a strong campaign for G.G. Jackson, and Vince Williams Jr. It was in a losing run. Can they contribute to winning basketball? I think Vince Williams Jr. can. I think the jury's out on G.G., but in the right role, he most certainly can as a scorer off the bench. And Vince Williams Jr. as a role player off the bench. Those two can win in those spots. They were outside of those roles this past season, and while they overachieved, are you trying to win a championship or not? Let me know if you agree or disagree with me in the comments. I have a feeling most of you are going to disagree with me. That's fine. Let me hear it. Tell me why. We can talk it out in the comments section by all means. On our Wednesday edition of the show, DeMichael Cole will be back with you. Again, he's been breaking news, talking Tony Allen and all sorts of other fun things. Check out that episode and every episode of Locked On Grizzlies when they drop. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also over on Amazon Fire and the TV Free Channels app. Make sure you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available as part of the Locked On podcast, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. I'm so grateful that you joined me on this episode. I hope you'll join DeMichael tomorrow. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, subscribe, hit us up, be a part of our conversation and be a part of the Memphis Grizzlies content consumption that only Locked On Grizzlies can provide. Until next time, I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you 1,000 times. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time around here on Locked On.